Hi, I'm Sasha and I'm from Marent Crafts. Today we're going to be looking at the Jelly Roll Rug Wadding Roll. So this is from Bosal. This was actually made to go with the pattern that RJ Designs produced. The first pattern was back in 2017 and it was the original Jelly Roll rug. This was the original rug. She then went on to do her rectangular rug, then also went on to do pillows and placemats, and the one that she's just brought out is the Jelly Roll Rug Tree Skirt. Now here at Marent we supply all of these patterns. We have patterns from RJ Designs and also Poorhouse Quilts. But today we're going to be primarily looking at the Jelly Roll rug and its technique and the products that you use to actually make this project. So the Jelly Roll Rug Wadding Roll itself comes from Bosal. It's a Catardin wadding and it's produced in two sizes, 25 yard by 2.5 inch or 50 yard by 2.5 inch. Now depending on what size you go for depends on the size of the rug or the project that you're going to be making. The 25 yard along with one jelly roll will make a small to medium size rug. The 50 yard will make you a large size rug of about 1.5 meters in diameter, and also you would probably get a couple of cushion pillow covers out of that, as well as maybe a placemat or two. But you would probably need 1.5 to 2 jelly rolls to go alongside this. Now when we talk about jelly rolls are a licensed product from Moda, and jelly rolls are a fabric strip set. You get 40 or 42 strips which are 2.5 inches wide. Today though we are actually going to be using Fabulous 40s from Lewis and Irene in this project, but bearing in mind when I say Lewis and Irene, that is because I am referring to the pattern and the wadding and not the Fabulous 40s strip pack from Lewis and Irene. The first thing that you're going to do is take your jelly roll and you are going to open it up into its strips. You're going to lay them out. You're going to organise what way you would like your fabrics to go, whether you want them to come off of the roll as they are produced, or whether you have a difference in the colour contrast and you want to play with the patterns. And from there you are going to join all of your jelly roll strips together, and primarily to make one large jelly roll. This is to make the oval rug, and so the technique for the oval rug to the rectangular rug and the cushions are slightly different, but we're going to talk about those in more detail later on. So for the oval rug you are going to join all your jelly roll strips together. So you would undo your jelly rolls and then you are going to take your strips and you are going to join them on the bias. This means that you are going to have one of your jelly roll strips right side up and the other jelly roll strip wrong side up. So basically your right sides together are facing each other. You're then going to place under the sewing machine needle. You are going to sew from the top left hand to the right bottom side. So you're doing it in a diagonal stitch. So we're just going to pop this under the needle and I will show you more closely. And we are going from the top to the bottom. Now if you want to do a line on this you can, or you can just do it by eye. I tend to do it by eye because I've done quite a few of them now. And then you are going to trim off the excess, or the ears as I call them, and your jelly roll strips are joined, and you're going to keep doing this until all of your jelly roll is joined together. And so you're going to have 40 strips all joined on the diagonal, and you're making primarily a very, very large jelly roll. And then once that's done, you are going to roll it all back to keep it together. So the next thing that you're going to do, and this is really important, is putting your wadding inside of your jelly roll strips. And you're going to be making this fabric noodle ball, as I call them. And this is really, really important because this stops you stretching, twisting, it stops the fabric from getting knotted together, and anything you do at this point which helps you put the rug together to keep it really, really nice and flat, it helps so much. So to make this ball, you're going to take your strip and you are going to take your wadding roll. And as I say, this is a continuous wadding roll. So you've got no joins in this, so you don't have to worry. If at home you wanted to do it yourself, you would need to cut an awful lot of 2.5-inch wadding strips and join them. So this is why this Bosal product makes life so much easier. So you are going to take your wadding and you are going to place it on the top of your jelly roll. So your jelly roll is going to be right sides facing down and your wadding is going to go on top, and then you are going to fold the sides in to the centre, and then from there you are going to fold that in half, and you are going to keep doing that as it's under the sewing machine, and you're going to top stitch right the way down through. Now, bearing in mind for this, I take my top stitch up to about 2.8 as well, just to make that stitch a little bit wider under the machine because you are going through a lot of layers. Also, when it comes to needles as well, this Janome machine, I've got the actual Janome purple tip needles in, but you can use a denim needle or you could also use a top stitch needle as long as it's got a really good point to it. I'm using grey thread on here, and that's just because grey disappears. So as I'm pushing through the sewing machine, I'm actually doing a folding and turn motion. Now, some people like to use binding clips and tend to do 1 metre or so with binding clips to hold it in place and then pop it under the machine. But I've just found a way that's easy for me to actually be doing it as I'm pushing it through the machine. And you're going to keep doing this right the way through until the whole of your jelly roll, wadding roll has gone, until it's all disappeared. You may have a little bit of jelly roll fabric left, but you can just trim that off as you need. And this will keep going through the machine. And as you go through the machine, the important thing is that you start winding your ball. So I'm just going to show you what I mean by this one. So as this comes through your machine, it's really important that you make sure that your actual fabric noodle, as I call them, is going all in the same direction. And you're going to start winding it around. And as you wind, you're not pulling, you're not stretching, because you don't want to be pulling the wadding or the fabric. And you are just winding around in different directions just to make the ball. And this makes for life so much easier because you're not having a tangled mess of meters and meters and meters of jelly roll wadding and fabric all around your feet. So by rolling it the way that I am doing, you are making life so much easier for yourself later on in your project, because by doing it this way, you are not pulling, you are not twisting, you are making sure everything is going in the same direction, so that when it goes under your sewing machine, when you actually start making the rug, it actually comes off of the ball in the same way. When you start your rug, it's really important that you read through the instructions really, really carefully. In the instructions, it will explain how to actually start the rug, because as they are different patterns, each rug has a different starting technique. So for example, with this one, I've already started and I'm just going to continue a little bit with a zigzag stitch to show you how it comes off of the ball and into the rug. So I tend to put the ball on the floor so it's free flowing, so it's not going to get tangled either, and it's not going to keep falling off of my desk. As your rug gets bigger and bigger, I find at home it's really easy just to put some books around your sewing machine if you haven't got a large table with your machine, And that means the rug isn't dropping, it's not drooping. You're not putting an awful lot of pressure on the rug. And you want to remember you need to keep this as flat as possible. So when we go to our zigzag stitch, it really is personal preference on what size you would like your zigzag to be on the rug. I know in Roma's patterns, she asks you to use a 5.5 and a 2.5 stitch. But for myself, I prefer a 5.5 and a 2. But again, that is just my preference. And I really hope that at home you will play around with those stitches, and you can use any decorative stitches that you choose on this. It doesn't have to be a zigzag stitch. So we're going to pop this under the machine. And again, you will see, obviously, as the rug starts to get bigger, we are starting to drop. So it does make sense to pop something underneath here. And you are going to take it really nice and slowly. There is a technique to this, and it's all about not stretching, pushing, pulling. You are letting the sewing machine do its job. You are letting the walking foot do its job by actually taking the fabrics through the machine. And so you're not actually holding it back or pressurizing the machine almost into doing a faster stitch or a slower stitch. I would always recommend that you take your sewing machine to about 50–55% speed as well, because again, you're doing an awful lot of zigzag stitching and you will miss stitches. It's not going to be perfect, but that's the idea about these rugs. They are slightly shabby chic, and do not worry too much on how your stitches look. It's just about securing your strips to the next strip so you have a secure rug. So I'm just going to drop my needle and start sewing. And as you can see, we're not going fast at all, and we are just making sure that we are lined up around the outside, and we are just really slowly pushing that through. Now, as you see, as it comes through the machine, you can check on your stitches, and also keep an eye on your bobbins and your threads, because your bobbin thread will run out quite quickly. So I'd always recommend to have lots of bobbins pre-filled so that you're not having to waste time by unthreading your machine to pre-fill bobbins. And this is the technique, really, in essence. This is the only thing that you really need to worry about, is making sure that you are not pulling or dragging this through your machine. Now, a lot of people, when they take this out of the machine, have an awful lot of problems with it warping and curling. And this is where ironing comes in. And it is really important that for every 2 rounds that you do, that you give it a really good iron, okay? And that's with a hot iron, no steam. But I do use a starch. So the starch that I choose to use is flatter, and for me it gives a great way of actually stabilising those fabrics so they don't stretch out and they keep perfectly flat. Now this product is from Soak, and here at Marent we do supply Soak as well as flatter. So please check that out on our website. But it is really important to make sure that when you are ironing you use some sort of flattening starch spray, and you only need to mist this over, because the last thing we want to do is to be adding water to our iron and actually getting the product damp. If you get the wadding too damp, that when it dries out it will start to curl again. So by using some sort of starch, the fabric almost remembers that the idea is that once it's sprayed and heat's applied, that it has to be flat. So by using water, obviously once it dries, it has no chemical makeup there, so it will curl up again. So it's really important that you follow this process. And so once you continue round after you've been pressing, you can then decide on what size that you choose this to be. It can be 1 metre, it can be ½ metre, it can be 2 metres. Again, it's down to you how many jelly rolls you have, how many wadding rolls you have, and also by following the pattern. I know that in Roma's pattern she has lots and lots of different sizes and different ways to do this. So we have looked at the oval jelly roll rug, and now we're going to start looking at the rectangular rug from Roma. Now this is done in a slightly different way. So if you have dexterity problems, for example, and you wouldn't be able to actually manage using the actual ball and actually putting that under your sewing machine and working it around with a zigzag, by using the jelly roll rectangle pattern or the placemats and the cushions, you can actually do it in a different way, which means you're only working with strips. At the very beginning, when you start this rectangular rug, you are not going to be joining your jelly roll strips together. You are going to keep them as single strips. And that means you're going to take a strip and you are going to take your jelly roll wadding roll and you are going to cut it to the length of the jelly roll strip. And you are going to do that for as many strips as you require. So if you wanted to do a 20 strip rug or a 10 strip cushion, you can do that. You just have to make sure that each of your strips has a piece of wadding that is the same size. You're going to take your piece of fabric and you are going to take your piece of wadding, and the same way as we've done before, we're going to place the wadding on the top. We're going to fold the sides into the centre and we're going to fold in half. And you're going to top stitch this in exactly the same way as you've done before, but instead of turning it into that ball, we're just going to be having 40 to 42 noodles. And once they've gone through the machine, they're going to look like this. And this is when I decide how I'm going to have the placement of the colours, whether I want it in ombre effect or whether I want to follow the way that it comes off of the jelly roll. And this part, you need to make sure you keep these really nice and flat. Now, to start joining them together is slightly different again, because obviously when we actually look at the placement to make the rug or the cushions or the placemats, you are always going to have two edges that are pre-bound. So you need to make sure that you're working in pairs all the time. So you are going to join your noodles into pairs, into fours, into eights, and then carry on to however big you want it to be. So if you wanted it to be a 16-inch, you would join your two sets of eights together. And this is what it will look like when you've started stitching these together. And again, I've just used the zigzag stitch, but it's always really important to make sure that your top and your bottom are always an edge where it looks like it's bound. So then all you would need to do is add bias binding or a binding to the edge. So once you have joined all your noodles, as I call them, together, you're going to do a couple of things which is really important at this stage. Roma talks about stay stitching. Now, before we do any cutting to get this to the correct size, you're going to make sure that you stay stitch this. And stay stitching is where you do a line of stitching and then you would cut just after that line of stitching. And that actually means that your edges are not going to become frayed, and you're not going to lose stitches, and you're not going to break those zigzag stitches. And to do that, you're going to keep your stitch at 2.8 because you're just going to do a straight stitch for this. And it is a straight stitch straight the way through all of them. And by stay stitching, it means that it is making your stitches stay in place. Once you have stay stitched, you are then going to cut, and you're going to cut after your stitches, and this would depend on what size you are doing your project. If it is a placemat and you wanted them at 12 inches, then you can actually stay stitch every 14 inches, for example, and then cut after, so you're not actually cutting through those stitches. Now, talking about these edges, so when the edges are actually unbound like this, we're very lucky in the fact that we have got two edges that we don't need to worry about binding. So you only actually need to use a tiny bit of bias binding or even just some scraps that you've got at home. Here at Marent we do many different types of binding, and it's really popular. We have a huge array of different colours and different sizes as well, so please check those out. And also, the reason I like to use bias binding on the jelly roll rugs and on the placemats is because these are quite movable. It's not like a quilt where we're having straight edges. You could actually cut these into a circular shape, you could cut them into a triangular shape, any shape, but you want that movement of the bias binding so it actually moves with the project that you're doing. And this is so easy to attach. So you would open out your side where your fold is, and you are going to pop that onto the edge of your project. This is just a few strips that I've sewn together. And you are going to use that fold line to stitch all the way down through. And that's almost like a guide. It's a really good fold line, but you can draw a line on there if you needed to. And from there, you're going to fold that over. Now, my preference is to hand stitch. I prefer to hand tack that over because I like the finish, but some people like to put it through the sewing machine. Just be aware that whatever stitch you use on the back is going to show on the front of your pillow or your rug. So today we have looked at the RJ Designs Jelly Roll Rug patterns. We have looked at the Jelly Roll Rug Wadding Roll from Bosal that we also stock. And we also have looked at the Fabulous 40s rolls from Lewis and Irene. Those are the fabrics that I've been using today. But please check out our website and we will see you again soon.